Perfect. All right, so today's meeting, we're going to be going over NOCSAE 101 and how it impacts our roles as equipment managers. Couple updates from oncoming sports groups. We got Clean Out for a Cause. Go ahead and utilize Clean Up for a Cause. It is great service that USG promotes. We always use them at the end of every season. They'll send you bags, boxes, labels, anything. We've got guys enter the portal or guys that are graduating, guys and girls. It's just a great way to get rid of all that gently used stuff, from gloves, cleats, t-shirts, even the gently used socks. They'll take everything. You can go ahead and box those up and send them on to Josh, and they'll put them to a good cause. They have their locker room direct surplus online, as well as their spring scholarship on the April 26th. The scholarship is available for all to apply, and they're looking for GAs and student managers that need funding from everything from school to AMA programming. And then, as always, you have the CWS, Christians Working in Sports, convention happening in June 21st to the 22nd. For CEUs, please just make sure you have the following listed. For all these bullet points, make sure you have your first, your last name, school, organization, district, and whether or not you're certified. And please have your cameras on at all times. It just helps the certification process. There will be a QR code for you guys to scan at the end of the meeting as well. List on some upcoming sessions. On April 24th, we have football prep and everything that goes into that, what we're all doing to prepare for the football season. And then May 29th, we'll be going over developing equipment room policies. With the mentor-mentee program, if you want to be a mentor, you have to be AMA certified for 3 years and in good standing. And mentees, you have to have your certification or membership as of the year 2019 and later, and we'll be accepting new members as they come. And if you're interested in joining any of that, you can email the committee at mentorship.engagementaema@gmail.com. We're always looking for mentors and mentees, so don't be afraid to sign up for that. Or if you know someone who's kind of interested, go ahead and have them sign up as a mentee. Today's panel, we have Mike Oliver with NOCSAE and Becca Huberner with Northwestern University.
Hey, Spencer. We also have Will Rokamp from Kansas State. He's the second AEMA representative on NOCSAE, so he was able to join us last minute.
Perfect. Okay. All right, let's get into some questions. What are your current roles with NOCSAE, and what is your day-to-day relationship and responsibilities with it? Mike, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm the executive director and general counsel, comptroller, custodian, window cleaner. I wear a lot of, in fact, I've got a hat rack outside my door because I wear a lot of hats here. But I've been doing that since 1995. And, you know, we run pretty much everything from research grant funding to standards development and maintaining our accreditation as an ANSI, American National Standards Institute, or ANSI accredited standards developer. So been doing that for a while and thoroughly enjoy it. Absolutely rewarding.
Thanks. Becca, what about you? What are your current roles with NOCSAE?
Sure. So I'm in my, about a year and a half of working with NOCSAE as one of the AEMA representatives on the board. And so basically, as a board member, Will and I vote on standard updates, changes, kind of anything that the board deems necessary for operations. And then we bring the equipment world into the NOCSAE world, which also includes athletic trainers, doctors, researchers, recertifiers, equipment providers. So we just are able to bring the equipment voice onto the board.
That's fantastic. Will, what about you?
I think Becca covered it pretty well, knocked it out of the park with that answer. I think I joined in 2019, I believe, when Al stepped off the board, I stepped on. And then when Chris Young left the board, I reached out to Melly and said, Melly, I think, not trying to be arrogant or cocky, but I've worked football quite a few years, baseball and softball. We need somebody from lacrosse, soccer, and some of the other perspectives. And that's when Becca came on board. And I think we have a good balance of people with experience across the NOCSAE sports And that's another thing I struggle with. It's NOCSAE, not NOCSAE. And I know Mike sometimes corrects me with that, but yeah, Becca pretty much nailed it. It's really cool to be on the board. It's really neat to talk with Tony and Bob from the NARA perspective. There's times we sit in there and Dr. Cantu's talking about concussions and things that are going over our head for sure, to where I sit next to Stan Jurga, and Stan's with All-Star, and Stan's knocking physics equations out of the park as he's thinking about things during this meeting. So it's a really cool cross section of people that me and Becca have done it on the boots on the ground perspective to all the people that have their PhDs and doctorates. It's a pretty cool board, pretty amazing.
It is.
It's a blessing to serve on it. Really is.
So Spencer, let me add some context to what both Becca and Will said.
Yeah.
NOCSAE exists as basically, or functions, I guess, as two entities. So there's the board of directors, and both Will and Becca are directors. They have a vote on the board just as much as any other director member. And they do things that corporate directors do. So they're involved in improving budgets, they're involved in reviewing personnel, they're involved in making policy decisions about the direction of NOCSAE or where we need to focus. All this sort of general corporate work. But the board also is a part of a little bit bigger group. We have a committee at NOCSAE called the Standards Development Committee. And that committee consists of, first, all the board members. But second, we can add others to that committee. So we currently have our technical director on that committee. Our research director is a voting member of that committee. And we actually have a couple of emeritus people who are no longer directors or directly involved by contract, but they still participate as members of that committee. And that's the committee that does the difficult work on standards development. What are we working on? What do we need to change? What should we do in a particular standard to make it better, easier to understand, easier to apply? And so both of them serve in both capacities. It's a remarkable interchange. NOCSAE has, I think the last count was 18 members of the board, 16 of whom are voting members. And that group by design represents specific kinds of interests. So Will and Becca are what we call the consumer or direct user representatives, people who are actually hands-on the athletes on a day-to-day basis and deal with the equipment on a day-to-day basis. Will mentioned Stan Jurga at All-Star. Stan's one of those interesting people. Yes, he represents the manufacturer's interests, which aren't always aligned with everybody else's, which is appropriate. But he also has a degree from MIT. So he does sit there and talk about, physics formulas and all kinds of things that quite frankly probably go over most of our heads. But we have those interests all across the board in basically three categories. So they're user consumer. We have the manufacturing or production producers area. And then the third category would be, we call technical and scientific. So researchers, doctors, MDs, others who are involved in improving athlete safety.
Wow, there's a lot of moving parts to that.
Lots.
Becca, well, thank you for representing the equipment managers on that side too. What specific equipment does NOCSAE cover, and how does it affect the sports teams that you work with? Well, why don't we start with you?
Hold on, unmute myself. I think, be honest with you, I've learned a lot I just was in the baseball, softball, football mode, and I've just jumped on there. I'm looking on my computer here. You can go to their website and you can see exactly the sport by sport, and it's baseball, football, lacrosse, polo, and soccer. And I've got to do full disclosure here. I had Mike and some of the NOCSAE people come over because they're in Kansas City. We're touring our facilities and we're in soccer and we're looking at the shin guards, and guess what's not on the shin guard? It wasn't NOCSAE certified. So I was like, well, that's embarrassing. And I was the one that pushed through that order after they put it in the cart. So there's components at times that the one that surprised me was lacrosse balls. I had no idea. And Mike will tell us stories of people trying to do counterfeit lacrosse balls and the shenanigans, so to speak, that go on behind the scenes that I never knew NOCSAE did that and never knew it was a part of it. So I think the best thing to do is get on the NOCSAE site and see the day-to-day exactly what products it does impact with the sports you work in. Because you just get caught in that mode of it's just the helmets, the little tag on the back. It's more than helmets, especially when you get in the catchers, the commotio cordis, the impacts of the chest protectors. It's quite a bit more. So I got my eyes open on the day-to-day what NOCSAE does impact, so to speak.
Nice. Becca, what about you? How does it affect the teams you work with?
Yeah, to kind of echo what Will said, basically for me, it's lacrosse and soccer specifically that I work with those sports. So it's basically just making sure that we're actually putting NOCSAE certified equipment on our student athletes to keep them safe, and then maintaining the recertification and pieces for those things to make sure that we remain safe. And then to just maintain the pieces, make sure, nothing's broken and all that to lose certification, because then you're in real trouble if you put student athletes out there without certified pieces. So, but like Will said, there's a big infographic on the website, the NOCSAE website, which is nocsee.org, that lists everything sport by sport that is covered by development and performance and test standards. And then Mike, maybe you can touch on that we don't actually test the equipment, just the rules.
Sure. Yeah, happy to do that, because that is one of the most common misconceptions about what we do. So as an accredited standards developer, we actually create the standard. We write the words, put it in the proper format, do all the research necessary to support, justify the standard. We're involved in enforcement, at least from a standpoint of making sure that a product that has the NOCSAE logo or the NOCSAE mark on it, in fact, meets the standard. But you'll commonly hear people say, well, is it NOCSAE certified? And they probably mean, does it meet the NOCSAE standard? And that's the question to ask. So if a product meets our standard, it'll have the mark on it. But a lot of people assume that means that NOCSAE is the organization that's making the certification of compliance. And that has never been true, although it's easy to understand why. Once upon a time, for us anyway, it was the manufacturer who made the certification. If you look at an old helmet, if you've got one, you'll see the NOCSAE mark on the back, and it'll say manufacturer certifies, meets NOCSAE standard. And that's how certification is done across the board these days in everything from military equipment to ball bearings to hypodermic needles. It's manufacturer certifies compliance with some standard. We decided in 2015 that we wanted a higher level. And so we began to require that equipment be certified by a third party, independent of us, independent of the manufacturers, and based upon a very rigorous quality control program, annual audits of production facilities wherever they are in the world, Timbuktu literally, or China or Taiwan. And so the certification of compliance today is done by an organization called SEI. And if you work with our equipment regularly, you'll see now that mark says SEI certifies that it meets the NOCSAE standard. So that's one aspect of our relationship with AEMA, which we're hoping to sort of springboard into a bigger area. And that is, we think this is a great opportunity for us to clarify some misconceptions or maybe misunderstandings and provide a little more detail into exactly how we function and what it means in that regard. And the lacrosse ball story is a very interesting one. And I'll give you the brief story. People ask me, why in the world is it important or necessary to have a standard for a lacrosse ball? I mean, it's a rubber ball. Who cares? It only has to weigh so much. It can't be, it's got a diameter restriction. It's got a, how soft can it be? And so we've had a lacrosse helmet standard for many, many years. It was like the third standard we developed way back in the early to mid 70s. But about 8-9 years ago, we were asked to develop a helmet standard for women's lacrosse. And there's a big division in women's lacrosse. Some think they should have helmets, some think they shouldn't. And we were doing the research. What we started looking at was the ball. So if the ball is the primary source of injury in women's lacrosse, if you get hit with a ball and you don't have a helmet on, is there something we can do to ball performance that might improve the level of safety? And so we began looking at developing a women's lacrosse specific lacrosse ball. So it would be softer than the one that's used in the men's because you can get hit in the head with it. And we determined through some research that there was a softness level measured in compression, deflection, and some other things, that if a ball could meet that standard, you could probably have a significant positive effect on reducing head injuries from lacrosse ball impacts to women in women's lacrosse. But in that process, we sent, I don't know how many hundreds of dozens of balls that met that standard out to men's teams. So we just like you to use them and see what you think about them. And they all wrote back and said, we think they're fine. Looks good to us. So we said, we won't have a women's lacrosse ball standard. We'll just have a lacrosse ball standard. And so now we have a standard that says the ball can't be harder than a certain amount. It has to meet all these requirements. And now we know we've introduced a safety component from the ball itself, whether it's in the men's side or the women's side. And maintaining that standard is important because when you test a helmet for compliance, you test it by shooting it in part, hitting it with a lacrosse ball out of a cannon. And so when you know what the lacrosse ball is going to do, it's much easier for the helmet designers to make decisions about where the coverage is supposed to be and what it's supposed to do when it's hit. So everything works together, but standing by itself, people go, who needs a standard for a lacrosse ball? It's like having a standard for a basketball. I mean, basketball does what it does. So lots of stories like that.
Hey,
That's
Mike,
really
it's Will. Can you talk a little bit about the SCI standards and how many? I know there's certain thresholds that we allow, like there's so many pieces that get destroyed during testing, and how many of those, am I making sense what I'm trying to say there?
Yeah, you are. So when SCI certifies a product compliant with our standard, they have their own program for that. They have to follow what our standards require. So all they're doing is making sure that the manufacturer is doing what our standards say they have to do. And one of the ways we do that, and it's applicable to all standards, is we have a standard that says, manufacturer, when you make a product that's going to be certified, you have to be able to establish to whoever the certifying body is, in our case, SCI, that you have tested enough samples, production level samples of that product to be able to state with the following degree of certainty, 95% confidence level, that 99.92% of all the products produced would meet the standard if you actually tested every one of them. Now, manufacturers can't test every one. It's number one, it would take years and years to get one product off the production line tested and out for sale. But there's a very well recognized quality control and quality assurance process in manufacturing that says if you do certain things, you can then make that statement to the level of quality. So one of the things SCI does when we have a manufacturer that wants to make a product is have the manufacturer send to them their quality assurance program. And SCI has their own auditors, their own certified quality engineers, and they review that plan. And if it doesn't meet our standard, they'll say, nope, plan's deficient. It won't accomplish what the standard requires that you do. So they eventually get a plan approved. The next step is SCI sends an auditor into the production facility where the product's going to be made, or maybe more than one. And the auditors, if it's in China, it's a Chinese auditor, but they'll go in and look at everything. How old is the equipment used to make the product? Where do they get their resources from? Where do they get the raw components from? What quality control checks do they have on the equipment that's making the product? How often do they pull samples? Did they test them correctly? How accurate is their testing equipment? It's a very, very detailed, time-consuming, and sometimes expensive audit. But that audit's done annually. Every year, if you're making a product like a helmet, a level 3 product, you go through that audit every year. And so that's just the way that we impose a very, very high level of confidence that the products that have our mark on them, in fact, meet the standard. I'd like to say this because it shocks some people, but the US military has standards for the advanced combat helmet. Those standards say that helmet, the manufacturer who makes that helmet has to establish to a 90% confidence level that 90% of those products would meet the military standard if tested. They call it a 90-90 rule. It's a very, very high demanding level, not as high as we do for football helmets, lacrosse helmets, and those things that if they failed could result in a catastrophic injury. So I like to say that the helmet you're wearing in football has been tested and proved to a much higher level of compliance than an advanced combat helmet. Now, that sounds really great. Truth of the matter is most of the tests to advanced combat helmets are ballistic tests, bullet impact tests. And if you make 10,000 helmets for the Army and you send them to the Army, there are very few of those helmets that are going to actually go into combat and be shot at. So yeah, 90-90 probably works for the military, but we know that every football helmet that's sold is going to be used and it's going to be hit, and the guy wearing it's going to go through hundreds, if not thousands of hits over its career. And so it has to always perform. Every helmet has to perform every time. So we demand a little bit more, but I think that's appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot that goes into that. Let's see. What are you doing now to prepare for when NOCSAE will implement standardizations on shoulder pads in a few years? Are there any recent updates or changes to NOCSAE standards that equipment managers need to be aware of? Mike, why don't we start with you on that?
Yeah, sure. So we launched into the shoulder pad, the possibility of drafting a shoulder pad performance standard after consultation with the NFL. We worked directly with the NFL, in particular, the engineering group at University of Virginia that does all of the NFL product testing. They test everything from artificial turf to shoes and cleats and ankle braces. Anything that an NFL player may wear is evaluated by the BioCore people at University of Virginia, which includes, I know most of you have seen the annual helmet ratings that they send out where they tell you what helmets are used in the NFL and how well they stack up against each other. So in doing their research to evaluate all the circumstances in which concussions occur in the NFL, one of the things they discovered was about 23% of all NFL concussions occur during contact between the concussed player's head and the shoulder of a tackling player. And so the question was, okay, we're doing lots of stuff with helmets, we're improving the performance all the time, but is there a chance that the shoulder pad could also be improved to provide an additional level of protection from concussion, not for the person wearing it, but for the person getting hit by it? And so we looked at that. And the first thing we did, which we always do with standards, is we funded a couple of research projects, one of which is still a little bit ongoing. But we want to find out what those impact scenarios look like outside of the NFL. So what happens at the collegiate level? What happens at the high school level? How often is the shoulder pad involved in an impact with a helmet, number one? And number two, at those levels, how often do concussions occur? And so we're still in the process of refining that data. And the other thing we looked at was, concussion protection aside, is there something we could impose through a shoulder pad standard that might increase the level of shoulder protection for the person wearing the shoulder pad? And, there probably is. I think that the general consensus is right now that most of the shoulder injuries that occur in football, at least, aren't injuries that occur from a blow to the shoulder. They're more likely landing on an extended arm or getting an arm twisted back underneath you or getting hyperextended and somebody sitting on your arm. But it's that leverage phenomena by getting the arm extended that damages the shoulder joint. And the shoulder pad isn't going to do much for that. Now, there are some things we could have about standoff and about, how far over the end of the shoulder can they go and so forth. And we're going to look at those. But I can tell you that we don't have a draft standard right now. We're still refining the data. But if the consensus of the standards committee is that there's enough there to go ahead and proceed with drafting a standard, we'll write one up. We'll probably publish it at some point on our website and then tell the public and the world, hey, we're going to have a discussion about this at our next standards committee meeting. Why don't you come and join us and tell us what you think?
That's fantastic. Becca, how does it affect you in your role? You're not really doing football, but.
No, it's just more informing others about things that are coming down the line. So it's, Will and I get the all access pass, I guess, essentially, of we know what's coming down the pipe, and to then just slowly inform from there obviously, until something is fully set in stone, we can't really speak much on it until it's fully there. But it's just more informing, like, hey, like, just be aware, like, we could see something in a couple years or whatever. So it's just more keep an eye out for things.
Absolutely. Will, dealing with football, how is it affecting you? What are you doing to prepare?
I would say some of the standardizations that affected us in the last 5 years, one of them was with the sport of baseball, Commotio Cordis, our supplier, who are, our apparel provider, our footwear company. Their chest protectors were not to the NOCSAE standards. So we got released from that, and we used some alternate protectors until our apparel company could implement the ones that were tested and met the standard, so to speak. The shoulder pad standard, we sit there and we talk about the things and we saw Hamlin go down there, a couple of years ago, and you're just wondering, was he covered? Was he fit properly? A lot of things run through your head. And I think a lot of times we're like, we've got to have a standard. We got to have it now. But there's so much that goes into it that it still blows my mind how much research and how much time it takes to develop a standard. So it's just interesting when you sit on the board and younger in my career, I had a helmet fell and I was mad at Mike about how it fell and the mechanisms that it fell. And, you look at the modern times now where Mahomes' helmet fails on national TV. But what you have to understand is the standards are there, and those standards are for that product when it leaves the factory. What you have to understand as well is how you treat that product when you get it in your equipment room is your responsibility. And in my case, at the school I was at, we had a painted shell that it was painted 3 times. So it was primed, it was painted gold, and it was painted green. So the product met the standard, but the steps that we did and how we wanted our look degraded the shell that I had a major failure of a helmet splitting in 2. So you've got to understand that we're not a watchdog group, and you got to understand what you do within your equipment room can impact things that do meet a standard that may hold you liable later. Am I making sense, so to speak? So be careful on what you do in your equipment rooms and your responsibility to maintain these equipments that is NOCSAE standard. Does that make sense? I'm not trying to scare anybody, but from my past experience several years ago, I was mad at Mike, but now that I'm on the board and understand some things, that was probably more on how we did things versus, the helmet did its job, and the things that we did degraded the helmet. So,
and let me throw one thing in here, because Will makes an important point. I know you guys see everything when it comes to helmet adaptations. Athletes like to do certain things to make the helmet more comfortable, or they like to maybe add something that the helmet didn't come with. And anytime an equipment manager, I don't care what level, if you've got a significant question or a serious question about whether some particular helmet you're looking at, presents an issue about the validity of the certification, call me, write me, or go through Will or go through Becca. I mean, one of the things we do is provide that kind of input to anybody who calls. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to parents on the phone or answered emails. I get 3 or 4 a year, especially at the high school level, where a player may have gotten an injury, maybe sustained a serious concussion, and they want to know why the helmet didn't prevent that. And in almost all those cases, they'll send me the medical records, they'll send me the CT scans or MRIs, they'll send me photos of the helmet. A couple cases, we actually had them send in the helmets. In one lacrosse case in particular, helmet shattered and the kid had a fractured skull. This was before the lacrosse ball standard was adopted. And it turns out the ball they were using at practice was like a cue ball. It was old, it had degraded, it had hardened, and it hardened enough to actually fracture the shell of the helmet. So we're happy to tell you, and obviously we're going to be honest with you. I mean, we're not a manufacturer organization, so if I see something that I think is a deficiency in the helmet itself or the design, I'm happy to tell you that. If I think it's something else, maybe with maintenance or with the recertification, I'll tell you that as well. But if we can provide that kind of guidance, even if it's just a small thing, I'm happy to do that. So don't, put us down in your resource Rolodex, so to speak, as somebody who can give you that feedback. But I bet you if you contacted Becca or Will, they could probably answer the question directly.
Perfect. A lot of good information. That's a great resource, Mike. Thank you for that. Can you share any challenges or obstacles you've encountered in aligning your equipment practices with NOCSAE standards, and how have you overcome them? Will, why don't we start with you?
I think I kind of touched on it before a little bit. We had that challenge where our supplier wasn't to the NOCSAE standard, and you've got to be able to go in there and talk to your coaches and talk to your administration and say, we're going to go with brand E in this case because brand N wasn't meeting that standard. So, and that's how we overcame that for that year. It's just kind of being in the know and you just got to be able to be a professional and have those difficult conversations when you need to have them, so to speak. And hopefully your coaches aren't too ingrained with a certain manufacturer where they feel like they have to still wear it, but by the standard, you can't wear it. So that's just how we overcome that instance, so to speak.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, don't be afraid to play that safety card when you need to make sure you're up to date on your
safety, service, and the swag. Get the safety.
Yeah. Becca, what about you?
Yeah, I've kind of had the same situation there with the chest protectors and the new standard. They weren't included in the hard goods, so it's just updating and upgrading all the equipment to make sure it's certified and safe to actually use, and actually like checking throughout the year, like, okay, did something rip? Is this malfunctioning, to make sure like we continue to keep everyone safe throughout the year. It's not just a one-time deal, like here you go. It's throughout a season, throughout a school year, just double checking and making sure everything is good to go. And always look for that NOCSAE or certified stamp. And at this point, for most equipment managers, that should be common knowledge, is to make sure you see that stamp before you put it into use, and then follow manufacturer guidelines for recertification so that it stays safe to use.
Perfect. Mike?
Yeah, it's there's so many little things that come into play depending on the sport and the equipment, and lots of those sort of hard to predict variables that come up. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to be sure that everybody understands that we can be a resource for that. I know that, for example, when it comes to how you care for a football helmet, we have questions about, well, what if I stick a Guardian cap on it, or what if I stick a safer cap on it, or what's going to happen if I put a self-made eye shield on, or I have a custom-made face guard that was just made for me, and it's got all these fancy things, and what's the consequence of putting that on a helmet? I can tell you what those are. I mean, if they're not certified, then you're not wearing equipment that meets the standard, and the rules say you got to do that. The other question I get probably more often than anything, at least I used to, now I think everybody understands, but with things like the Guardian cap or a visor or something that is not certified or not a piece of equipment that would meet the standard, most of the rules of play, and this includes NCAA, it includes NAIA, it includes high school, certainly NFHS, the rules of play by definition only apply to what's called a championship competition. That is competition that's formally structured, where the results are recorded somewhere as an official game. They don't apply to practices as far as the rules go. I mean, literally at practice, your quarterback can wear a beanie if he wants to, as long as he's going to have a red shirt on, so nobody's going to hit him, or a green shirt. But you can wear pretty much whatever you want to. So you want to put a Guardian cap on, or you want to put a safer cap on, have at it. Whether or not it temporarily alters the validity of the certification, you're not violating a rule when you do that. So far, we haven't seen in those two particular areas any evidence to suggest that there is a risk to the player of wearing a Guardian cap or a safer cap. They alter how the helmets perform. In some cases, they may make some improvements in how they test. I'm still unconvinced that they are making a substantial reduction in actual concussion numbers or severity. But that's that's a determination to be made by people that have more skills in that area than I do. What I do know is that anytime you put something between your helmet and the other guy's helmet, there are a lot of things that come out of that that could be good. I think the Guardian caps do a really good job of deadening the resonance of a helmet. So if two helmets come together, if you're a player, you know that's a loud event. You hear a lot of those across the practice. That's tiring. You might not get an injury, but man, you've spent the last hour banging and banging and banging. You got Guardian caps on, it's less. Guardian caps, I think, serve almost like a warning label too. So if everybody's wearing one, they look so big, you're looking across the line to a guy wearing a Guardian cap, and it's easy to go, oh, that's right. Don't put my head where it doesn't belong. You know, so I think it alters behavior a little bit. You know, I don't know that they're ever going to make it to games, but if they do, they're going to have to be substantially redesigned, because I don't think they'd hold up more than maybe a half a game, especially for an active player. I know the people that run the company, Lee Hansen and Aaron, his wife, and primarily Aaron. They never intended this to be a game piece of equipment. It was intended to help alleviate the concussion impacts that occur everywhere else outside the game. I also know that the NFL obviously mandates its use, and they think it's improved their concussion experience, although overall their concussions are up from last season, or from the season before to this last season, but they still think they're reducing concussions in the player positions that have worn it. But they also wear a different cap. The Guardian cap the NFL gets is not generally available to the public or to even to colleges. Now you could request it. There's a special way to do that, but it's much, much heavier than is sold online to the public. It's got a few more attachments, I believe, and maybe even a little bit denser foam. So, you know, we see all of that, and we understand, you know, what we're all trying to accomplish. It's just that making sure that the equipment performs as it was designed and intended to perform, to me, is the best you can do with a helmet, whatever you're talking about, adding something to it, taking something away from it, making it lighter, making it heavier. If you do everything you can to make sure that the helmet performs as it was intended, which means in the configuration it was certified, and to make sure that it fits. There's a great deal of data that says you get far more concussions in helmets that are improperly fitted than you do in helmets that are fitted properly. And you know, you guys are usually the ones that are making that final decision in most cases, to the extent that you can override, you know, the 5-star quarterback your coach just signed, who says he's going to wear this helmet. He thinks he's Tom Brady and can continue to wear a VSR, Riddell VSR 4 helmet, you know, 10 years after the NFL said you can't, and 20 years after it stopped being made. But yeah, proper fit and you know, and I'll say this, I'll throw this in since Will mentioned the Mahomes helmet. I would include in your helmet inspection practices, number one, you may already do this, but I would encourage you to evaluate the helmets of the players that are on your team most likely to be involved in helmet-to-helmet contacts at high energies. So you're talking about linebackers, you're talking about running backs, you're talking about, depending on your style, tight ends. But especially if you see a big hit, somebody's just, you know, just a big slobber knocker, it's not bubble kind of a hit. Take a look at the helmet after the game, because if you look closely, you might see a crack starting to develop. And our standards are very specific. We define what a crack is, especially for helmets undergoing recertification. You know, it has to do with whether the crack widens when you flex that part of the shell. It has to do with how long it is and so forth. But if you've already started propagating a crack in a helmet, yeah, that big hit you just saw may not have caused it to fail, but you hit it again in that spot and maybe it will fail. Now, that's probably not going to create a risk of injury to the player wearing that helmet that fails, but depending on how it fails, it may create a risk for the other player involved in that hit, the tackling player. So, you know, those little things like that are important. I mean, the best guess, and I've talked to the BioCore people about Mahomes' helmet, they're convinced that the temperature in that game was probably the third or fourth most likely contributor to that failure. They believe there's a maybe a paint issue, but more than likely they think there was probably a crack propagating already. And that was just the one that, with the temperature, that was one that let this piece come flying loose. So, yeah, pay attention to the little things.
Absolutely. Yeah. We always tell our managers we're on the sideline, we're watching the game, but we're watching it differently than others. When you notice a big hit like that, as soon as they come off, just go ahead and check it, give it a once over just to make sure. We've got extra helmets on the sideline to hopefully
Absolutely.
prevent something like that happening in game. Awesome. Next question, how frequently does NOCSAE standards change, and how do you stay up to date on these changes to adapt our equipment management practices accordingly? Mike, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So our standards change as often as there's data to support the change. We don't have a regular schedule. We change a standard every 3 or 4 years. We do have a requirement that if nothing's been done to a standard over a 5-year period, other than maybe some editorial changes or cleanup or whatever, then the standard has to come back up for evaluation to see if in fact there's anything we've missed. So that process does happen. But the primary thing is a standard changes if we learned something through our research or through somebody else's research that says, you know what, this is an important component of how a helmet should perform, and we either don't address it clearly or we don't address it effectively, or maybe the data that we relied upon has changed. And so when that happens, we would modify or revise, in that case, revise the standard. And the good news is we're the fastest. Our procedures allow for the fastest process from beginning to end to change a standard. If you did it through ASTM or SNEL or some other organization, it may take 7-8 years just to upgrade because of the data change. We can do it, the absolute shortest time is 2 years. And sometimes quicker than that, because the manufacturer may want to jump the gun and go ahead and make products that meet what it knows is going to become a new version down the road to kind of get a sort of an arm up on the competition in the market. But we have that process for 2 reasons. First of all, let's use the football helmet standard. So we have a football helmet standard. I'm company A, and I've got 4 models that meet the standard. I've been doing that, going great guns. And NOCSAE decides they're going to change that standard. And I've got a couple of restrictions. First of all, I have a license agreement with NOCSAE, and that license agreement says if you're making equipment that complies with a specific standard, and that standard is revised, after a certain time, you can no longer make that equipment to the old standard. You have to make it to the new standard or stop making it. And so that's built into the license agreement, but we make sure that when we do that, we give manufacturers time, if they have to retool or whatever, so that product will be available by the time the standard becomes finally effective. I mean, it makes no sense for us to say your helmet has to meet this revised version of the standard as of June 1st this year, when in fact there won't be any equipment out there that meets the standard. You just can't make it that quick. Right. So we take that into account. If it's a new standard, it's even longer than that, just because people may be going from nothing to something, and it takes a while to get ramped up. And they've got to go through the whole certification process and get their QA and QC stuff approved. So it just depends. It depends on what we find, and depends on how the data changes. And sometimes they're big changes, and sometimes they're just maybe, call it editorial changes, but clarifications, just to make sure that no one misunderstands what we mean by a certain phrase or a certain requirement.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Becca, how do you stay up to date on these changes?
Outside of our board meetings, which we have every February and July, follow NOCSAE on Twitter, get them on LinkedIn. Everything's posted there. Go to the website. So check the website like you would check any other website. Everything's posted there. All the standards are there. All the updates are there. Contact information, if you need to get a hold of anyone on the board, is on there. So I usually, that's if I wasn't on the board, those are the avenues that I would use to stay up to date.
Perfect. Well, what about you?
I echo what Becca said there. I think what's kind of unique as well is, since I've jumped on the board, I think 2019, is we talked about youth standards and developing a youth standard. And we've had some interesting discussions and things you don't think about. For example, what if you have a full-grown man in 8th grade who's wearing a youth helmet, and how does the standard affect that? And the components of plastic used to manufacture the process and things like that. So what's kind of cool to see and understand and wrap your head around as you sit on the board, fortunately, like me and Becca, that standards just don't happen overnight. But when they do change, Mike and the board understand that it takes some time. Like you said, it's at least 2 years, and it's not going to be a drastic change where, oh God, we got to cancel our order and get the other one in, so to speak. So, but jump on the website. There's a lot of good knowledge there, a lot of good products, list the products that are approved and not approved. And if a coach says, I want this kid wearing that product, you can say, Coach, see right here, we can't wear that product. This is the one we should be in. So just keep up to date with that website and what's going on, and be ready for the changes when they do happen.
And let me add something to what Will just said, and I was going to mention it earlier. One of the benefits to having a group like SEI, the Safety Equipment Institute, do the third-party certification is they maintain, at our request, a list of products that have been certified by sport, and then when you get into the sport, by manufacturer or brand name or model name or all. And so if you've got a helmet that you're looking at going, you know what, that certification on there looks pretty weird. Something about this doesn't feel right, or I hear we're going to order a whole bunch of this model XYZ. I don't have it in front of me yet, so how do I know if that even meets the standard? On the SEI website, which is just seinet.org, on the very upper left portion of the home screen is a thing called certified equipment, or list of certified equipment. You click on that, you can scroll down to NOCSAE, and you'll open up that window, and it'll go by sport, and then it'll go by which version of the standard, so you want to get the most recent version. And then it'll list everything by brand, by rebrand. So maybe it's an all-star made product, but it's been rebranded under some other name. So you'll find that. And there's also a link at that same location to what's called the legacy list. So maybe a product was made 2 years ago. It has maybe a 5-year useful life. But the manufacturer is no longer making it, hasn't been making it for 3 years. So SEI hasn't certified any of that product for the last 3 years because the manufacturer is not making it anymore. But there's product out there that's still current, could meet the standard, or would have to have met the standard, hasn't reached the useful life end yet. And so those products are listed on the legacy list, and you can look at those just like you look at the regular one. So all of that data is right there on their website, easy to find. You know, and again, if you go through all that and you can't find what you're looking for, call me, email me. We'll find it for you if it's not there.
Perfect, great information.
It's not there because it's not certified. Get rid of it. So we'll get you what you need.
Awesome. Probably enough time for one more question. Can you share the best practices for educating athletes and coaching staff about the importance of NOCSAE compliance and its impact on their safety? Mike, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, the only thing I would say is, besides the fact that we've been doing this for a long time and our folks have a really good idea what they're doing, and that the standard is more demanding than almost any other personal protective equipment standard that you can find literally in the world. It truly is kind of a gold-plated standard. And the other thing I would say, and this is something that I think we don't emphasize enough perhaps, but the diversity of the people involved in what we do, from the standards committee makeup to the board, is one of the things that gives us the strength that we have. I mean, we truly have the top dogs in every one of these areas. I mean, Bob Cantu is our vice president. He may be the world's authority on concussions. You know, the guy's resume is 274 pages long. I mean, honestly, it's a book. You know, we have, I mentioned Stan Yurga at All Star. I mean, few people I've dealt with are as innately intelligent as he is and understands the physics. You know, we've got people who've been in the direct care of athletes, whether they were team physicians or maybe sports-specific physicians. We have a representative from the American Pediatric Association, but he actually is the the chief medical officer, if you will, at Northwestern. I guess I don't know what the correct name is, Becca, but I know Jeff Mianis, Dr. Mianis is, I think he's at the top of that heap at Northwestern as far as medical care. So we have people who are the best of the best, and nobody there is afraid to speak their mind or to challenge somebody else who maybe they think is dumber than a mud fence. One of our board members is Dr. Jack Ryan, who represents the American Orthopedic Society for Sports Medicine. I think it's AOOMS. He's an orthopedic surgeon out of Detroit. He is a West Point graduate, full bird colonel, retired, still provides medical services to West Point. He's been team physician for the Lions, for the Red Wings, for everybody else. And Jack is adamant that everybody support their position. He's not at all shy to say that's a stupid comment, prove it. You need that kind of interaction in the process of developing a standard. That plus, and I mentioned at the very beginning of what I said today, manufacturers have no control over what we do. They account for about 1/3 of all the votes available. 2/3 of the other votes are completely unrelated to the production or the creation of products for sale. So yeah, they have an input, they have an appropriate selection, but in balance, they don't control anything. And I think that's important to stress. Their input is necessary. We need to know the things that they bring to the table. We also need to be sure that the public understands, and you guys in particular, they don't call the shots.
Right. Becca, what about you? What's your best practices for educating coaching and staff and players?
I just have conversations with them, honestly. Most of our student athletes don't even know what NOCSAE is. So I kind of explain and go through the processes, like there's safety things in place that we have to follow to keep you safe. So just kind of having those informative conversations. And then obviously with coaches, they usually know what NOCSAE is, but don't quite understand the process of why we have to do things the way we do because of the NOCSAE processes. But yeah, just have conversations and inform everyone that we have to do things a certain way because of this.
Right. Well, what about you?
Same. Over the years, I've had players come in, athletes come in and say, I saw this, on TV. I want to wear it like this. I want to wear it like that. My standard response was, I want to look your parents in the eye if you get hurt. And I did everything how I was supposed to do it while you're on this level. Once you get to that level and you make the money, that's your choice. But if you want to alter things and sign waivers, we don't do that here. Let's follow these practices. This is why we follow these practices, because I want to see you get to that next level. So I think, if you get a cocky freshman in over the years, and it's a little bit different now with people coming in and out, but long story short is when you have those players come up to you and say, shake your hand and say, hey, you didn't tell me what I wanted to hear, but you told me what I needed to hear to get through. And to me, that means a difference of, okay, they finally got it. We got them to that point. And, now when they go on to that next level, if they want to assume that risk, that's up to them and the next level and how they handle those things.
Absolutely. But at least we did our part, keeping them as safe as we could. Awesome. Well, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I'm going to pass it over to Melly if she has any closing remarks on this. Also, you can scan your QR code now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you again for being so generous with your time with the
Absolutely.
AEMA. I'm really, just for decades and decades, you've come to our conventions, and having you here live on this Zoom was really wonderful. And it was very well attended. We have people on here. I was
one
scrolling
decade
through.
would have been enough for me.
Yeah, they just kind of happen, don't they?
Yeah, too many times these days I hear these two phrases. Decades and decades you have been whatever. And
Yes.
at your age,
Yes.
that's more the doctor
the
response.
one thing that the new kids are calling me is, oh, you were born in the 1900s.
Yeah, your
So,
birth
like
year starts with 19. Oh my God. Yeah.
Yes,
I
but
get
thank
that.
you very much with your time.
Absolutely.
I've been scrolling through. We've got people from Hawaii all the way to Rutgers,
Yeah.
right? This is our organization. This is wonderful. We have people from high school, every single level on this Zoom call. And that's great stuff. This is professionalism. This is what the AMA is. This is what we aspire to be, is care for our kids. And this was very informational, and I want to thank everybody. Our organizations are celebrating 50 years, NOCSAE, 1990, and as well as the AEMA. And so we're gonna have a big celebration for that at our convention in Atlanta. Big plug for that. I really hope to see all of you there. We got some swag bags. It's gonna be wonderful. We got wonderful speakers, a lot of people working really hard. Also, fill out that last thing, that that questionnaire that was sent to you by your district directors. We are trying to push this organization forward. We deserve it. And we are trying to get move in a direction where we hire our own Mike Oliver, our own executive director, that will advocate for us, that will generate revenue, that will do all those things, have all those hats. So please, I encourage all of you to fill that out and take a look at that. Otherwise, once again, great job, everybody, and stay warm. Congratulations to everybody who's still playing in basketball and all the baseball, softball people out there in lacrosse, spring sports.
Thank you. And before everybody runs off, I'm going to make a request. We have a project underway that, and I can explain why if you're interested, but if everybody who's here today would send me a really short email and tell me 3 things. Tell me how many helmets you have in inventory, whether they're actually issued in a particular year or not, but current helmets that you could issue if you wanted to. How many players are on your roster? So if your high school, maybe it's 2 or 3 rosters, but I'd like to know that. And then third, how many of you take advantage of the RFID labeling program? You may not realize, but that's a NOCSAE program. I mean, a lot of Helmet Tracker is the one that's helping us distribute that. And people look at it as, oh, they're just doing your inventory, management system, and that's great. But the actual RFID tag is something we developed, and we're using Helmet Tracker to help get out there, not just to schools, but to manufacturers and reconditioners. But if you could just do that, send me an email, has those 3 things: total number of helmets in inventory, how many players on your roster, and then whether or not you utilize the RFID tags as a part of your, I don't need to know the details of how, I don't need to know the models. In fact, I don't want to know the models. I just want to know the numbers. If you could do that, I greatly appreciate it. And I would be happy to reply to each of you. So you'd have my email as well, and I'll throw my cell phone in there. God knows I probably shouldn't, but I will. So the best way to get a hold of me anyway. So thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you again, Mike, Becca, and Will, for being panelists on today's meeting. Thank you for sharing all of your information. Again, for everyone, please don't forget in the chat to add your first, last name, school, district, and whether or not you're certified, to make sure you get those CEUs as well. Scan this QR code. I hope you guys all have a great rest of your Wednesday. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, guys. Good luck.